Okay, thank you. Welcome to our presentation. It all runs downhill, the high cost of cheap meat. Thank you for joining us. And as we gather, we encourage you to let us know where you are by putting your name and location in the chat. While doing that, please enjoy this video of Raging Grannies, a part of the Des Moines WILPF, as they are singing about food safety at a rally, and listen to these quite remarkable lyrics.
The first one we're going to do is Home on the Earth, to that well-known tune, Home on the Range. Shake it if you want it, okay? But we're going to have fun while talking about very serious issues. Oh, give me a home where the rivers don't foam, where the squirrels and the chipmunks can play, where the waters have fish you can put on your dish, and the skies are not smoggy and gray. Home, home on the earth, where there's food and clean water for all, where we know corporate greed won't fulfill people's need, and humanity answers our call. We know that CAFOs aren't the answer they pose for the world's hungry people. In fact, our air, water, soil, our bodies that toil are in danger, so now we must act. If our food and our land are at corporate command, then the green is the wealth they control. Local farmers best know to sustainably grow. Food sovereignty must be our goal. Woo! Let's return to our roots, growing safe food that suits everyone, everywhere on this earth. For the health of each one, generations to come, it's a right of all people from birth. Humanity answers our call. Woo!
Quite remarkable, I think. I'm Emily Keel of the Triangle WILPF in North Carolina and the moderator today. We're offering you information about the high cost of cheap meat. It's an honor to follow Maud Barlow, whose lifelong fight for clean and affordable water for all is exemplary. Our focus on industrial ag will highlight the water contamination that is one of its many violations of our human rights. My partners in this endeavor are Jan Quarterman, a leadership team member of Iowa Des Moines branch, and she's also a member of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Ag Steering Committee. John Aspray is an Iowa organizer with the Factory Farm team at Food and Water Watch. He works with Iowans to build support for a factory farm moratorium and to hold politicians accountable. He's also chair of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, a statewide coalition concerned about the harmful impacts of factory farms. John is a WILPF member, and he's doubling as our tech manager today. Sharon Donovan of the Des Moines branch is a retired teacher and has lived all over the world and now fights powerful corporations destroying our planet. Lib Hutchby of the Triangle branch, who you will not hear from, has had an extensive role in guiding our mission. We've joined our branches together to address a crisis in the production of food, meat production, that threatens our health and safety of the majority of Americans, regardless of their food choices. It's urgent that we understand this because our choice of meats not only affects our personal health, but the environment in a major way, the safety of water systems, the social fabric of the communities which house them, and of course, the lives of the animals confined. We'll offer you some information from experts and from those who have been directly exposed to the inhumane practice of farming called concentrated animal feeding operations, known as CAFO, C-A-F-O. North Carolina and Iowa are leading states in this practice of concentrated animal farming, the industrial animal farming. It's characterized by large numbers of animals of the same species on a small area of land using farmers that are under contract to a few major corporations. The scale, the density, and the practices associated with these operations present a plethora of public health and environmental hazards, such as large volumes of untreated animal waste, the release of environmental contaminants to air, water, and soil, and the generation and spread of antibiotic-resistant pathogens. The industrial food animal production is the primary source of meat in most of the markets in which we all shop. Increasingly, we are seeing how CAFOs are directly associated with occupational and community health risks, as well as the social and economic decline of rural communities. Our two guest speakers today in our video will highlight this, but just listen to this really shocking fact first. A few years ago, there were approximately 1.6 billion animals, billion animals living on 25,000 factory farms in this country, producing 85 billion pounds of manure each year, equivalent to the human sewage generated by a human population 30 times that of New York City each year. And unlike human sewage, this is not required to be treated before just being turned out into the environment. Our video will give you a clear picture of how it is released. Contents of hog manure that pose risk to water quality include antibiotics, bacteria, and other pathogens, heavy metals, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and so on. We know from our experience that Iowa and North Carolina are riddled with CAFOs, and I just tried to do a little research to see how many other states have them. The EPA, charged with regulating CAFOs, didn't have even close to adequate info on the existence of CAFOs a decade ago, nor did the individual states. I think that speaks volumes about the intent to regulate. The Natural Resources Defense Council set about to compile information on the location, the ownership, the number, and the type of animals, and it took them 10 years to get information. We do know that at least 40 states have CAFOs of different animal types. Today, we're going to address hogs and a bit of poultry, but there are also factory farms of cattle. Iowa has approximately 23.8 million hogs, really the leader. Minnesota has 9 million. North Carolina has 8.5 million hogs. There are about 77 million in the U.S., and we export a huge amount of meat. What defines a CAFO by animal population is that a single CAFO may contain between a few hundred up to 10,000 or more hogs, depending on their weight, on a single farm. On a single poultry farm, there can be up to 125,000 chickens or up to 55,000 turkeys. So let's jump in and let me introduce our video. The video is featuring Elsie Herring, a most remarkable woman. She was from Duplin County, and that's in North Carolina, but she represents thousands of the victims of environmental racism in the rural U.S. She was a woman of color, courage, candor, and stamina who persisted in the face of death threats, threats to her family heritage, threats of disease, and yet she managed to collaborate with scientists, journalists, activists, farmers, and neighbors. We grieve her recent passing and acknowledge her many gifts. And now we'll watch a 4-minute video in which she relates what life is like near an industrial hog farm.
This tractor we own now, my grandfather purchased in 1891. Then there's 3 more tracts that he purchased in 1897. He loved this land. This is all he had ever known. The original hog farmer lives in that second brick house over there. He grew up next door to me over here. And my mother considered his mother her best friend. And since he knew us, we didn't really think he would do anything like that to us. But then when he decided to get in bed with the industry and was willing to take our land, I mean, you know, that was a rude awakening. You can't smell that now? It's coming over because he might be started back spraying, or maybe he never stopped, but you can smell it now. When you're smelling it on the wind, it stinks, and that's one thing. But when someone is 8 feet from you, releasing it into the air, When it's being released, that's what you're breathing in. And I say that's when it's at its rawest. It's raw, you know. Your eyes will start running because, you know, all that ammonia is being released, that methane gas, the hydrogen sulfide gas. You know, it's all that's being released. And there's probably other gases, and there's antibiotics and growth hormone, pesticides and stuff other stuff that I probably don't even know and couldn't pronounce if I did, that's in that waste. The waste gets washed through slats, and it goes into this lagoon, which is really a cesspool, and that's where it's stored. And to keep it from overflowing, they have to remove that waste, and they do that by this irrigation system. I started speaking out in the 90s because I want the people to know that not only are they blowing animal waste on us, I think it's intentional, and they're trying to run us out of here. See, they want to develop this land. Any kind of dirty industry that they don't want to put in a affluent neighborhood, they'll put it in poor and black neighborhoods because they know we don't have a voice, they know we don't have money, and the representation is just not there. Every time it rains like this, a hurricane comes through, they flood, and the pigs drown, and so do the chicken and the turkeys. And this is not the first time the industry's seen this. With these floods coming through and all this waste, human and animal, and all those chemicals and pesticides too, and the gases, it's a real mess. Our water supply is going to be in a bad way for a long time. We've already tried the proper channels, you know, the county commissioners, the health department, the governor, the attorney general, you know, as a matter of fact, 2 governors. But these people are elected by people like me, and they don't represent us, and they let us know to our faces that their loyalties lie with the farmers and the industry. And we're not even suing the farmers. We're suing the industry, Smithfield. It's just an ugly industry, and they want you to believe we're feeding the world. But when you know that they are being slaughtered every day, 32,000 at a day, that's enough to make you want to understand why you're doing this to these animals. And they be squealing, so you know they're in pain, so they know pain. I'm hoping that people will really open up their eyes now that Florence has come here. And we've told them in the past, it's happened once, it's happened twice, it will happen again. You need to clean this system up, and here we are, right back where we always was.
We are actually dedicating our presentation today to Elsie Herring, who you just heard describe the unbelievable challenge of living near a factory farm. Her brave actions have helped to inform and inspire us to this day. Let's turn now to our first guest, Naima Muhammad, who's been the organizing co-director of North Carolina Environmental Justice Network since 2013. In addition to organizing and advocacy, she's an educator to those not aware of the technology or toxicities. She has also co-authored many publications in community-based public health research. She is on the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality's Environmental Justice Advisory Board, which is one of the only such boards in the country. So Naima, can you share with us your words? Naima, are you
Yes,
with us?
I'm here. There's
Okay.
something that popped up on my screen.
Okay.
Okay, I got it. All right. First of all, I'm sorry about that, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Naima Muhammad, and I would first like to thank the 34th Triennial Congress for asking me to do this presentation, to take this time to talk with you. I only have a few moments. I won't spend it. I'll try to get on into what I need to talk about. Well, I live in eastern North Carolina. I'm in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, but it's the eastern part of the state. And in North Carolina, we have nearly 9 million pigs, and we have 9 million people in the state. So there's at least one pig per person with some pigs left over. Um, but the pigs are not spread out in the state the way the people are. The pigs are predominantly in eastern North Carolina, and they are in um, predominantly African American communities, Native American, and Latinx communities. Uh, thus, we have deemed it environmental racism because we believe that these communities were intentionally targeted because they don't have the economic uh, ability to fight off these uh, high wage or high earning industries, and we don't have the political representation that we should have, even though we vote every time. But our representatives have proven that they do not have our interests at hand, and so they are constantly showing us where their loyalties lie when they pass bills to usurp the power of the community. Then you know they're not thinking about you, and so as a result, with these 9 million pigs in eastern North Carolina, the problem with having this many animals, first of all, they're kept in houses, little houses that look like little metal barns, and it could be up to 5,000 pigs in one small house. Um, and so you may have 4 or 5 houses on one person's property, so you talking possibly 20,000 pigs right in one on one piece of property. And the way they handle the waste from these animals is what has created a huge problem in North Carolina. They have what they call a lagoon and spray field system, and I always tell people we're not talking about that blue lagoon that Brooke Shields hung out in. We're talking about a lagoon that's full of nothing but feces and urine from these animals. And the lagoon is sitting out in the environment. It's open. It doesn't have a top on it, so it's just sitting out in the air, open, and whatever's there, the methane, the hydrogen sulfide, the ammonia smells that people report, all these chemicals are evaporating into the air, and it's making people sick. We have people talk about how they get constant headaches, their eyes run water, their noses burn, they have upper respiratory problems. We have high rates of asthma with children living within a 5 mile radius of these animals. This has been documented through research to show that if the children living within a 5 mile radius have higher rates of asthma, on more asthma medication, missing more time out of school than children living beyond that 5 mile marker. And that's been well documented. Also, the reporting of elevated blood pressures, upper respiratory problems, um, immune systems being weakened, people's um, blood pressures elevating, a lot of mental stress, a lot of depression exist in these communities as well. People talk about how depressing it is to live where you have to negotiate with the air. You can't even just step outside whenever you want to. You got to open your door just a little bit to see whether or not it's stinking outside. If it's not stinking, then you rush out to do what you have to do because you want to get done and get back in the house before the odor comes. So if you got to cut grass, rake leaves, if you work in your flower beds or whatever, you try to hurry up and do it. And I've had many people tell me how they feel like they are prisoners in their own home. You know, they can't open their doors and windows because if they do, the odor comes, the odor gets into the homes and it's hard to get rid of. They don't use their clotheslines anymore. Where they used to could do their laundry, take it out, just go out the back door and hang them on the line, cost them nothing but their time. They can no longer do that because when the odor comes, it gets into their clothing and they have to redo their laundry. And therefore people have been forced to either buy a washer and a dryer or go to
Oh, yes, they
laundromat.
have a annual meeting, and yeah, I'm listening to stuff now, but it's going on like forever. So, I mean,
And somebody need to
it's a
mute
very busy
themselves.
time. So I'm going to go ahead and.
Mhm. Oh, y'all talking to me?
Go right ahead, please.
Okay. All right. And so, people talk about being made feeling like prisoners in their homes, not being able to put their clothes on the line because if they do, they in the older comes they get into their clothes, they have to redo their laundry, and so as I stated, they've been forced to buy washers and dryers or to go to laundromats, not being able to enjoy their property in the way they intended when they moved there. People have a lot of land around them, and so they were able to do family gatherings, community fellowships, right in somebody's yard at the drop of a dime, and they didn't have to go rent a facility and try to get everything to that place. They could just go out in the backyard, and everybody would come to that location, and they would have family reunions or community fellowship times or just birthday parties, whatever they wanted to do. But they can no longer do that because of these animals in the community and the way they handle that waste in those lagoons. It makes life unbearable for people. And and it doesn't have to be like that because in the year 2000, Smithfield, who was the owner of all these pigs before they sold out some of their business to the WH group out of China, they were when they were the full owners of everything, they made an agreement with the state of North Carolina. It's called the Smithfield Agreement, and you can Google that agreement and read the entire agreement. But under the Smithfield Agreement, um, Smithfield paid this researcher from North Carolina State $17.2 million to identify a different technology to handle this waste, the animal waste that would make life better for everybody, in particular people living around these animals. And the guy, his name was Mike Williams. Mike Williams found 5 new technologies. It brought them back, introduced them to Smithfield, gave them all the information, and Smithfield told the state of North Carolina it was not economically feasible for them to get this clean technology on the ground, and the state let them walk with that. Which I always say is all criminal behavior in my mind, because we sure couldn't take our waste and leave it sitting out like that and nothing happens. And we got regulations around how you handle human waste. Well, the animal waste ought to have the same kind of restrictions. And but it's anyway. So people are being made sick, and they are just really frustrated at this point and fed up with trying to convince the state of North Carolina that they are doing the wrong thing by the people of North Carolina. Our regulatory agent, which is the Department of Environmental Quality, we've been battling with them for years about their lack of regulating. The fact that they don't do what they need to do as a regulatory agency to rein in these dirty industries that's wreaking havoc. And in the process of people dying from this stuff, they just steadily heaping more stuff on, allowing more dirty permits to be issued on a regular basis. And so we're fighting all kinds of industries here in Eastern North Carolina. And my colleague, Donna Chavis, who you all will hear from, is going to talk about an additional problem that we're having with the CAFOs around the stuff they trying to call clean energy, which is being pushed on us in the form of biogas. So she will
Naima,
talk about that.
Naima, can I ask you to, in your last 1 minute, to just say a brief thing about the moratorium in North Carolina?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. Okay, so in 1997, because of all the objections by people, citizens in Eastern North Carolina, going to our elected officials meetings and just really taking over those meetings, we were able to get a moratorium passed in North Carolina at the state level that stated that um, what the moratorium was put in place to slow down the proliferation of the Smithfield bringing more pigs into North Carolina, and that moratorium is still in place as of today. It's renewable every 2 years, and we have to watch because, as I stated, we have a bunch of legislators and a regulatory agency that don't give a darn about the people of North Carolina, and so we have to keep an eye on all of this to make sure that moratorium stay in place. While it's not everything that we want, it's at least a little bit of something that helps hold back some of the suffering. But people in North Carolina are really going through. And my friend Elsie Herron, who you all just watched the video on, that she fought a long, hard battle with this industry who stole her family's land and then dump the animals on them and turn around and start spraying animal waste on them. And she went to her grave fighting this fight. Um, and we all feel like she went an early death due to the stress of dealing with this stuff. And so we need changes here in North Carolina, and we are trying to organize with the communities to get them to really become more vocal again as we were in the earlier days. We to address what's happening here in Eastern North Carolina.
Naima, thank you so much. And I know this is all a very personal story for you, having known Elsie for so long, and
Yeah.
seeing so many people that you know being affected. And we appreciate the history you can give us, having lived it and experienced it through many people. So I thank you so much for what you have done, not only taking the time to be with us today, but for the years of service you've given to opening our eyes to the dangers of the food system. So you're a valuable resource to the community of those fighting CAPOs in North Carolina and beyond our state. So thank you so much.
Well, again, I would like to say thank you to your organization for having me. And I'm sorry that I have to leave, but I have a funeral to attend. Um, so I
Being with
wish
us
you,
today.
yeah, I wish you success with the rest of your conference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you. And now we're going to hear from an affected member of the community's Donna Chavis. She has over 40 years of service in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors of the local, state, and national level, and she currently serves as a senior climate campaigner with Friends of the Earth US. She's founder, convener of the Red-Tailed Hawk Collective, and is a recognized leader in social and environmental justice, change, and practice. Donna was a member of the planning committee of the first National People of Color Leadership Summit in 1991, which developed the principles of environmental justice. She remains committed to those principles today. Among other organizations, she's a member of the CAFO Roundtable of North Carolina. She's a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and resides in the tribe's ancestral home of Pembroke, North Carolina. Donna is going to talk about the impact on Indigenous people and introduce us to biogas. So thank you, Donna, for being here.
Thank you, Emily. Excuse me. Thank you, Emily. And I'm I go along with Naima in my appreciation for the opportunity to speak today. As I was introduced, I want to acknowledge the land on which I stand, which is the historic and ancestral home for the Lumbee people. There are many other nations that through time use our territory in a number of ways, but today it is the direct home of the Lumbee. Oh, my throat is, I hope I'm not sounding too bad. It feels scratchy.
I'm fine.
Thank you. I want to open with a quote I think is very relevant to our meeting today. And you may have heard this over time, but it still rings so true for, I think, for everyone. It's an example of ancient history that serves us well today. And that is that a nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. Then it is done. No matter how brave its warriors, nor how strong their weapons. That is the Cheyenne proverb. And I believe that as time has passed over the centuries and decades of colonization, that has rung so true as you see the women at the lead of so many battles, including the right to vote for women and then for others. And in the current day, battle against environmental racism, as Naima so well described earlier. I also thank you for the previous session. I got to sit in for just a little bit that was acknowledging the water and sanitation as a basic human right. I believe it's critical, and this has been documented and put into practice with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And embedded within that are so many points that talk about the rights being human rights. And it was really good to hear that being discussed earlier today. Well, I want to start by sharing a definition with you as I begin these remarks. And that definition is a sacrifice zone. Elsie spoke about feeling that corporations are trying to force them out of their homes. That is a basic part of sacrifice zones. And you also heard Naima talk about all of the damage to the environment in the homes that are so close to these CAFOs and these the procedures that they're trying to start around digesters. So anyway, commentators that include Chris Hedges, Joe Sacco, Robert Bullard, and Stephen Lerner have argued that corporate business practices contribute to the producing sacrifice zones. And I think that's so much of what I've heard today and in previous events that I've been a part of. Another definition of sacrifice zone is when there is no choice in the sacrifice. Someone else is sacrificing people of their community or land without their permission. Another way to say that is in the name of progress, being economic development, education, religion, factories, technology. Certain groups of people, called inferior, may need to be harmed or sacrificed in order for the other groups, the superior ones, to benefit. Sacrifice zones have been a part of history directly in formal forms, the way that government identified, especially, and I'll lift up the reservation territories that the Dan sisters were so important in trying to fight the mining of radioactive materials off of their territory and having the shavings of those in piles on the land where their children actually played on them for entertainment. So sacrifice zones is not an informal statement. And when you hear communities, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities and low wealth communities talk about sacrifice zone, it's a very real thing in US governmental practices. It's not exaggeration. So why do I start with the definition of sacrifice zones? Well, just remember the definitions I gave. That applies to all beings as described in the book, Spirits of the North. Those beings being the two-legged, the four-legged, the winged, the finned, the rooted, and flowing. That can be translated to the humans, four-legged animals, birds, fish, trees and plants, and rivers. And I think you've heard already today and probably in some of your other sessions, which I admit regretting not being able to sit in on because of my regular work schedule. But I'm sure you've heard of these kinds of damages to all of these populations and peoples. And of course, Naima just spoke of those, and I thank her so much for talking about the impacts of swine CAFOs. In the past 5 years, we have indeed had challenging times with the many attacks on the natural world as one industrial scheme after the other was made known. And when I say we, I'm speaking about Eastern North Carolina predominantly. Some of these you have heard about, and some you may not have hit the national radar yet. And it's not a mistake that the eastern part of North Carolina actually contains the highest poverty rates in the state, as well as the most diverse populations. That is no accident. All of this has been happening. So North Carolina has generally been supportive of industrial polluting by corporations over all other beings. Some examples have been the Ag-Gag Order of 2015 that limited access to facilities by researchers, journalists, and landowners. And right before that act went into effect, there was a video made of how the chickens were being processed at one of the facilities in North Carolina. If I'm not badly mistaken, it was Mount Ayr, which is the one that's in my county. And they made that before it was passed because they didn't think they were ever going to be able to have access again to these facilities. Well, that law was struck down by federal courts in 2020, but there's others that remain. For instance, we have the original 1979 Act that established the first Right to Farm Act in the country, and all other states have followed. Now, you may have heard about right to work laws, and North Carolina is a right to work state, which means that an employer can fire you at will. You have no recourse. And the Right to Farm Act title kind of scared me because it brought up that image, of the right to work and how it's enforced. What has happened with this particular act is that it has not gone away. In 2000, there's been a number of cases against the act. And so the legislature has just improved it year after year. It's had 4 different times that it was rewritten. And in 2018, the 4th time that it was amended was marked. And the General Assembly has updated it, the Right to Farm Act, following unfavorable court rulings or anticipating new nuisance filings. Now, it's really a statement of our government legislators and regulators that they are predicting into the future what might happen to a law to limit the power of the CAFOs, and they change it ahead of time. I mean, to me, that is I can't even think of the term right now to call it, but it's just really classic in terms of how government has lined up with the corporations. Now, this act has limited the possibility of litigation to challenging polluting industry by setting up a series of difficult requirements to qualify, and then put restrictions on penalties. And Naima didn't mention it, but the original settlement with Smithfield was in the 8-digit category, the tens of thousands of dollars. And through this act and rulings of the court, they were able to bring that down to 3.5 million. Now, the courts are staying busy with North Carolina communities, bringing these cases to them around not only the pollution, but also the damages that's being done to their homes. And so North Carolina has just dug into the issues, and they're fighting what they call nuisance laws, which they call them nuisance because they're a nuisance to the corporations. So let's talk about poultry CAFOs. And in my county, in Robeson County, we actually are impacted by many forms of what is being called natural energy right now. Swine CAFOs is one area. Poultry CAFOs is the largest, but we also have a growing interest in in the woody biomass, wood pellets that companies are using. And these are all connected in so many ways. So I'm going to try to share with you quickly about the connections of these pieces and how they will impact us into the future in harmful ways. So on any given day, North Carolina is number 1 through 4 in the country, poultry, chicken, and turkey production. This includes poultry CAFOs and meat processing. The way that they give the numbers easily can be to hide what the actual amount of chickens are being processed or grown. And it's sometimes difficult to get accurate figures, as Naima referred to. The largest chicken and hog meat packing factories in the United States are in a 20-mile radius of each other here in Robeson and Bladen counties. That's Smithfield Farms and Mount Air Farms. The massive concentrated animal feeding operations are also called factory farms. They provide thousands of hogs and chickens to these two meat processing centers every day. There are over twice as many chickens and turkeys in North Carolina as there are hogs. The poultry CAFOs produce 5 million tons of waste per year, including nitrogen and phosphorus levels 3 times those of hog. Delaware-based Mount Air Farms has benefited from a North Carolina presence. The agricultural food processing company contracts with broiler producers in more than 24 North Carolina counties. Mount Air's processing facility is in Lumber Bridge, and it is the largest broiler processing plant in the country. And Robeson County is where Lumber Bridge is located, and Lumber Bridge is less than 15 miles from my home. So with CAFOs, we have a combination of contract and corporate facilities. Naima mentioned the contract farming, but the corporate is also a major issue. The contract farming can be defined as agricultural production carried out according to an agreement between a buyer and farmers, which establishes conditions for the production and marketing of a farm product or products. Typically, the farmer agrees to provide agreed quantities of a specific agricultural product. Now, I think it's important that we pay attention that contract are farms that are owned by the farmers. And what happens to these contract farmers is they are totally controlled, either by Mount Air, Smithfield, there's any number of other prestiges in North Carolina. Tyson is in North Carolina. So there's any number of corporations that control these farmers. And when I say control, we hear the stories of the farmers who want to get out from under these contracts once they find out how bad they are for them, and that they may own their land, but they don't really own their earning anymore because the corporations are telling them what to do and how to do it. Another great example of that is during the storms of Matthew and Florence. There were, the exact numbers not known, but millions of poultry animals were drowned. And so when the corporations were asked to address that, their answer generally, if these were contract farmers, was, that's the farmer's problem. We don't have anything to do with that. So they don't have the farmer's back. They're literally saying they're on their own when it comes to problems such as that. Now, corporate farming is the practice of large-scale agriculture on farms owned or greatly influenced by large companies.
Donna, I'm just, hi, thank you. I'm just going to ask you to wrap it up if you could in just the next minute.
Sorry.
And it's okay. You've given us important information in the difficult story of contract farming. So
well, I regret not getting to this and having veered off my written remarks because there's so much to say about the corporate farming. I'll wrap it up to say what I really was leading to was the connection between all of these supposedly natural energy resources. We have, for the first time in history, an alliance of big ag and energy corporations, and that is shown through the alliance of Dominion Energy and Smithfield Foods, where they are on the road to have the largest factory farm digester to produce methane, factory farm methane gas. This could be our methane of the future. The fracked shale gas is running out and people are wondering what's going to happen. Instead of going to renewable, what they're doing is calling this renewable. The thing that they're trying to form is called line RNG, with RNG meaning renewable natural gas. So our work is before us to try and stop this definition of what is renewable. So let me end with that same statement so that we remember who we are. A nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. Then it is done, no matter how brave its warriors or how strong their weapons. That is the Cheyenne proverb, but it is the call for all of us as women to not let our hearts get on the ground. It's not easy. There's times when I've been ready to give up, but as long as our hearts are not on the ground, we'll keep moving forward. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I love that saying. It puts such power in our actions as women. So I really appreciate that. And we're so thankful for your work, which you've dedicated your life to, Donna, and your advocacy for all the affected people. So many thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
I just want to say too that industrialized agriculture makes cheap, low nutrient food available to us in excessive quantities. About 99% of all farm animals are now raised in one of 24,000 factory farms in the United States. Air pollution is the top risk factor for mortality in the U.S. and worldwide, and agriculture makes a huge contribution to this risk. There are about 400 different gases released from these manure mountains, including nitrous oxide, methane, CO2, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide. Children are at extreme risk of respiratory illness associated with this exposure. And others at extreme risk would be those with immune suppressed disorders, and pregnant women, elderly people, all at extreme risk. As factory farm waste decomposes, it releases airborne particulate matter like dried manure, feathers, bits of feed, and animal dander. Inhaling those large particles can cause respiratory irritation, bronchitis, and declining lung function. And small particles can even be absorbed in us per the CDC, causing systemic effects like even cardiac arrest from the dust. Amazing. For those who reside near the farms, they even have to close the windows in hot weather when there's no air conditioning, and to limit the children's outside activities. As Naima said, just tremendous risk and hardship for those people. The pathogens in the air can be transmitted to us through inhalation and also through drinking water, which the toxic waste enters after spraying on fields, which can then overflow with heavy rain or hurricanes. The preemptive antibiotic use in these animals is thought to reduce the chance of an infection and to make it easier to fight off bacteria and disease in the squalid conditions in which they're confined. 70% of all the antibiotic-related drugs used in this country each year, 70% are given to cattle, hogs, and chickens as feed additives. About half of the antibiotics are nearly identical to what is used by humans. This exposure to these antibiotics contributes to the increase in resistance of our human microbes and causes less effectiveness of antibiotics for us, because resistant strains of bacteria can be transferred to us by eating or handling of meat and can be present in manure, leading to polluting water supply, leaching into the groundwater or the surface water. The use of antibiotics in animals makes possible disease-resistant bacteria or the possibility of novel virus development. And boy, do we know what horrors that can bring. So if you don't even eat any meat or you're vegan, this antibiotic resistance is still your risk, since we share our microbes with each other, and it seems with these unfortunate animals. Now we're going to turn to Jan Quarterman for more on the animals themselves. Jan?
Well, thank you, Emily, and a good day to everybody. Well, as I think you've heard, and you probably knew before today, raising farm animals is now dominated by industrial facilities known as CAFOs. And the goal is one, it's to maximize profits. And they treat animals not as sentient creatures, but as production units. Raised by the thousands in a single location, animals are confined in such tight quarters that they can barely move, let alone behave normally. Vandana Shiva, who we heard from the other day and did a wonderful job, she calls it animal prison, and it's a very gruesome one at that. The close, cramped quarters prevent animals from exhibiting natural behaviors and instead create high levels of stress and suffering. That stress can lead to self-mutilation and biting each other, and just in an effort to find relief. Well, what's the solution to that mutilation that from the industry? They sever every chicken's beak with a hot blade, causing excruciating and chronic pain. Another solution that they offer in factory farms, tail docking. It's used on piglets without anesthetic when they are a couple of days old. It's intended to prevent the severe injuries that can occur when pigs bite each other's tails. Studies have shown that it causes acute trauma and pain and can trigger infections and leave lasting discomfort. Dairy cattle are docked because it's thought that it improves the cow's cleanliness and udder health. However, there's no scientific evidence for that, and it also leaves the cow without a way to effectively swat the flies. Notably, this practice of tail docking dairy cattle, it's banned or discouraged or declining in most industrial nations except one, and that one is the US. And yet another cruelty, dairy cows are forcibly separated from their calves when they give birth. I have experience with that from my sister-in-law because until recently, she lived about a half mile from a dairy farm. And she always knew when the calves were born. She would hear the bellows and cries for days, and she knew that yet another mom had her calf taken away so that all of her milk could end up on the grocery shelf and none of it for her calf. Pregnant sows spend their pregnancies confined in a gestation crate, which is a metal enclosure. It's scarcely wider and longer than the sow herself. And because they can't even turn around, they suffer leg problems and skin lesions. And not to mention they start developing abnormal behaviors. Growing pigs are confined to slatted, bare concrete floors. Stressed by crowding and boredom, they frequently resort to biting and inflicting wounds on their pen mates. So you're probably asking, is this the only way we can do it? Is this the only way we can put meat on our table? Well, I remember a different way of farming, and I know a lot of you do as well. All of our pigs had their tails, for one thing. They had room to run, and whether it was outdoors or in an outdoor pen. And I was in the birthing pen for my pet pig when she had her first litter. I was in there with her. She had 13 little ones, and she had straw bedding to lay down on when it was time to nurse. And I'd watch her make that bed just the way she wanted it before laying down. So all 12 of her teats were ready for the babies to latch onto. And nobody got laid on. That's what they say they have those crates for, to stop laying on the babies. And that doesn't happen. I can vouch for that. And I don't want you to worry. She did find plenty of nourishment for that 13th baby as well. Chris Peterson is a friend of ours, and he's a founder of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Ag that you heard about in our introduction. And it's something that our branch belongs to. He raises Berkshire hogs. And this is today, this is now. I don't want you to think that there's not still people doing it right today. He's the founder of the Iowa Alliance. I think I mentioned that. He tells us that when he goes out to the hog barn for the last check on a cold winter night and switches on the light, all he sees is noses and all he hears is snoring. And that's compared to what Elsie was talking about, the squealing and the pain from animals that are in those confined animal feeding operations. And he makes a living, and all his pigs have tails too. And the other thing is when he spreads that manure, because it's composted with the straw and he spreads it on his field, it nourishes the soil. It doesn't run off. It's not a liquid form, not those lagoons that we saw in the film and that we've heard about today. So he's making his fields better too. And I just want to say one more thing about Chris. You may have seen him on Bernie's ads. He did an ad for Bernie and during the Iowa caucuses, and that was our friend Chris. Well, time and time again, and I know we heard about this from Donna, undercover investigations and whistleblowers, that's how we find out about things. That's how we find out about things in our factory farms and our slaughterhouses. But instead of working to solve these problems that are identified by whistleblowers and others, they just simply try to cover them up. Donna spoke about that as well, these ag-gag bills. And, Americans are concerned. They're still highly concerned about animal suffering, about food safety violations, about everything, the pollution caused by corporate meat, egg, and dairy production. But factory farming lobbyists are pressuring state legislatures all the time in every state to pass ag-gag laws. We had our fourth ag-gag law passed in April. We have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican governor, and it sailed through. And even though 2 other versions of the law were held up by the courts, the third one is still there too, but they wanted to make sure that, so they got a 4th one. And under this one, if you knowingly enter private property without the owner's consent, and if you take oil and water samples, and think about that, you can't even go to get the air samples outside the CAFO. And we heard earlier about the intense health issues involved here. Just going and getting a soil sample can cause an aggravated misdemeanor on the first offense. A second offense is a Class D felony punishable up to 5 years in prison. There is some relief. There are people on the side of animals. Humane Society of the United States is one of them, and they're a member of our IARA coalition. And they joined, there's about 70 other nonprofit groups that defend civil liberties, food safety, the environment, animal welfare, and they've been able to turn back some of those ag-gag laws. And I think it's important that we're all in this together, those 70 organizations and all of us. And while I'm here today, I really want to give a big shout out to all you Californians out there, because you passed Proposition 12 in 2018, and thank you so much for doing that. It was a real victory for farm animals. It bans the intensive confinement of egg-laying hens, mother pigs, and calves used for veal. And of course, the industry appealed, and unfortunately, our Attorney General signed on to the appeals, even though we asked him not to, with a letter signed by all 30 of our coalition members in the IARA. He still went ahead, but we were again pleased just this past January when the U.S. Court of Appeals upheld Prop 12. So good for you guys in California. So friends, I want to close. I know this has been a really gruesome talk for a Sunday or for any day as that matters. So I'm gonna stop my talk right now. And Emily, I'll turn it back to you so we can hear more.
Thank you, Jan, for reminding us that it doesn't have to be this way, the way of the industrial farming. It does not have to be that way. Next, I think you'll see how John Aspray's passion for his career in fighting factory farms for Food and Water Watch has given him insight into the economic aspects of CAFOs. John?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And I want to thank everyone who's spoken so far on the panel today, as well as Maud Barlow and Mary Grant for talking about the intersection of water quality as well. You know, we've talked about so many different things with regards to factory farms today. I'm going to add one more layer, which is the economic costs of factory farms and consolidation. And to do that, we need to talk not just about farming, but our entire food supply chain. When most folks think about food, they think about 2 things: farms and grocery stores. But there's so much more to our food system than that. Farms rely on a number of other services to produce food. Animals need feed, veterinary care. And when it comes time to slaughter animals for meat, farmers need slaughterhouses, meat lockers, and butchers to prepare and sell that. Under a model of small-scale independent agriculture, stuff Jan was talking about, these are all different businesses in the community, a local economy. But starting in the 1940s and 1950s, some chicken farmers started to see the business opportunity of combining different parts of this economic ecosystem, what's known as vertical integration. This is where you see the emergence of firms like Tyson, who pioneered this model of animal agriculture. Tyson initially combined their chicken farms with a hatchery and a feed mill, which allowed them to produce for themselves cheaper than it would be to purchase from another business. They then used this surplus to convince poorer farmers to raise chickens for them for a fixed price, essentially hiring other farmers to farm for them. This was the beginning of contract and corporate animal farming. As companies vertically integrated, they were able to squeeze more profit out of the production of chicken. And with that profit, they reinvested the money to get bigger, which in turn created more profit. So where did this profit come from? I see it as a combination of 3 factors: technological efficiency, labor exploitation, and market domination. I think we all know about technological efficiency. It's the story we're told about how every company becomes successful under capitalism. Companies build facilities and buy machines that help workers get the job done faster, increasing productivity in a set amount of time. In short, they just do it better. And that's not wrong. It's definitely a big part of this, but it's not the whole story, which is where labor exploitation comes into play. Now, by saying exploitation, I don't mean to moralize. I'm using it to describe the economic concept of paying someone less than the full value of their labor and pocketing the rest as profit. Independent farmers sell their own products. They get the full value of their labor back to them, and they circulate that money through their local economy. But contract farmers are paid a set amount for a set amount of chickens. And obviously, Tyson and other firms like them aren't going to let them get the full value of that labor. So Tyson and these other firms decide what a farmer's labor is worth, and they pocket the rest as profit. When a company reinvests that profit to get bigger, that allows them to dominate the market. Bigger companies that are more efficient can make more money while matching similar competitors' prices or set prices lower than their competitors to drive them out of business. This applies at every step of the supply chain, from farmers to feed suppliers to packing houses. And this is where the picture of factory farming as an industry comes from. Like, we need to think not just the farm, not just the grocery store, but this entire system that is squeezing profit out of our food system. Tyson and other companies eventually expanded to the hog and beef markets using the same model of vertical integration. Since the 80s, we've seen the concentration in food and agriculture economy accelerate at a rapid pace. That means that independent farmers and slaughterhouses are getting pushed out. Most of them have, some are still around like Chris, but got pushed out or they got bought out. The slogan of the day was "Get big or get out." That was actually Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture who coined it. So as integrators took over the meat supply, it's no surprise to see that farmers' share of every retail dollar has plummeted from 41% in 1950 to less than 15% today. While the profit share for farm input, marketing, and processing companies has risen. It'd be simple to say that this system is a result of unrestrained market forces. One could, simply say that the US government has absolutely failed to oppose giant corporations that have taken over our food system. But instead, this system is the direct result of policies made in Washington that promote corporate agribusiness at the expense of all else. So when we're talking in the next section about stopping factory farms and what we can do to fight back, it's not just about stopping one or two facilities, but it's about fighting to reverse the course of decades of injustice in our US food policy system. Now I'll turn it back to Emily. Oh, Emily, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Okay, thanks. We've just been exposed to some really intense things today. Many would say horrifying revelations about our food system. One powerful thing we've learned is that when we buy factory farm raised meats, we're not only endangering the water and the air for all of us, but we're especially burdening Black, Native American, and Hispanic communities with bearing the awful effects that living in proximity to these things brings. We hope you've been moved by what you have heard from affected people, from those who are advocates for animals and for clean and safer air and water, from those who are taking the fight directly to the industry, and to those who are leading legislative efforts. You must be ready by now to take some action, I hope, to restore the safety of our food system. So let's go back to Jan for information on Iowa's attempts to stop the increase of big contract farms. Jan?
Thank you. Well, as you've heard, our branch is one of the 35 coalition members with the many rural and city folks who are alarmed with this move from factory farms to factory farms, to family farms to factory farms. And we have formed this, where we have joined this alliance called the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Ag. John chairs it, as you've heard earlier. I'm proud to be on the steering committee, and Sharon is also active on it. You're going to hear from Sharon in just a few minutes. And what we're doing is advocating for responsible and respectful land stewardship and livestock production. And we're doing that by calling on a statewide moratorium on new or expanding confined animal feeding operations. And you've heard that North Carolina is already successful in having a CAFO moratorium. As we've heard, the raw untreated sewage can contaminate our waterways. And so we have linked our moratorium to waterways. We currently have over 750 impaired waterways in our state out of 856 total. And our bill has said we want the moratorium to remain in effect till we only have 100. Our WILF members have been a big part of it. And here's what we've done, or some of the things that we've done. We've distributed petitions at meetings, farmers markets, the state fair. We've shown a film that was produced that addresses the issue from a health perspective. It's called Right to Harm, focused on the health issues of CAFOs, and some of you may have attended. We did show it to WILF members way back when. And I think it's been shown about 50 times across our state. We've plugged in with other organizations, and we've taken our fight to the Iowa legislature. And for over 3 years before COVID-19, through the IARA, we've held press conferences in conjunction with our lobby days to build support for the moratorium. And we had our raging grannies there for the last couple of them, and they were well received. They hand out the words to everybody so everybody can sing along, and people love it. They do sing with it with us, and it's been a really big hit of our lobby days. This year we've added something new, and I'm saying we, John and Sharon and I, have led this charge, and it happened because of COVID, when we knew we weren't going to be able to have a lobby day. So we hold lobby meetings with our state house and Senate members, with up to about 6 or 7 of our members that are from the district of the Senate or House member. And we brief them in advance. We send out a fact sheet to both our members and to the elected officials, and a wonderful fact sheet created by Food and Water Watch. And then we brief our members, and then we get together and we hold an extensive lobby meeting with these folks, where each person speaks about why the moratorium is important to them. And just like today, we have so many different, every person has a different perspective, and every person has a different point to make, and they're made very, very well. And I think we send a clear message. We just got started on that this year. I think we did 6 or so, half a dozen or so, and I'm sure that we're going to continue that next year. So that's it for me right now, Emily. Thank you.
And the Des Moines WILF is clearly in a leadership position in this. Now, Sharon Donovan has taken her fight to a place that more of us should consider. Would you share that with us, Sharon?
Sure. Well, what are we going to do about this tragic situation, horrible situation that is infecting and impacting all of us across the country? So when I returned, I was gone from Iowa for over 50 years. When I returned to Iowa, I was shocked at the environmental degradation of the state. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I became really depressed by what I saw. So I decided I would start joining volunteer organizations. So one of Central Iowa's most successful organizations is Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement, or CCI is what we call it. And so that was the first. Then I decided I would move on, and I joined the Iowa Economic Council. So it had 70 member organizations. So I thought, oh, they'll be really strong and powerful. And then I joined the Sierra Club, which is a wonderful organization. And then I added the Iowa Farmers Unions, and then it was the 100 Friends of Iowa. And then there was, of course, the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, whose sole purpose is to promote the CAFO moratorium. And finally, of course, in all of this was WILF. And all of these wonderful organizations, all working for against CAFOs. They play a huge role, and they also educate the community about the environmental problems that we see every day in Iowa and North Carolina. And they keep everybody's spirits high. And most importantly, as Jan just referenced, they lobby the elected officials. Yet, for all the effort a CAFO moratorium we have yet to be close to a moratorium. Industrial farming continues to destroy the soil, and even worse, the number of CAFOs continue to multiply. I've watched volunteers work so hard to change policy without much concrete results. So one of the most shocking wake-up calls I had was in 2016, and at that time, Iowa had over 13,000 CAFOs, polluting the state's soil and the water and the air. Hundreds of volunteers had been campaigning against the expansion of this awful industry. And finally, that winter, a bill calling for a CAFO moratorium finally found sponsorship in the state legislature. So we're very excited about that. Yet one elected official, just one, Just one, the chairman of the legislature's subcommittee on agriculture, was able to prevent this legislation from even seeing the light of day. This government censorship continues in Iowa today, with industrial promoting state house and Senate politicians assigned to key positions. Our elected officials are not representing the citizens of Iowa, they represent corporations. Immensely frustrated with water quality, at age 80, I ran for public office for the very first time. I ran for County Soil and Water Commission and was elected. I am not an expert on soil and water. You may have guessed that. But what I discovered was that I bring my own talents and experiences to the commission, and I have fresh insights and spirit. I do indeed now have an important role to play serving the community, and you could too. So my message, of course, is to run for office. Run for elected office, first because we need women running for office at all levels of government. And we must run because we need to change policy. We must run not because we might want to, but because we must. Often, many positions are also unopposed. So continue volunteering, educating, and lobbying, but we need the power to change policy. So it's past time. We need to be elected to office. So I'm going to urge everyone, and I want to see everyone out there on the campaign trail. Thank you.
Compelling argument for sure. Thanks for doing that and for talking about it. John is going to wrap this up with a summation of federal policy, more on biogas, and a call to action. John?
Thanks, Emily. So now that we've heard from Jan about some of the state efforts to support factory farm or to stop factory farms, and from Sharon about opportunities to run for local office and amplify our voice at the local level, I want to talk about two big things before we wrap up and take questions. Biogas and federal policy. So let's start with biogas. As Donna mentioned earlier, the spread of biogas initiatives in the same places that we're seeing factory farms is a major trend to watch. And that's because the fossil fuel industry sees factory farming as a new opportunity for a foothold in a political climate where fossil fuel companies are losing the narrative battle. Everyone knows fossil fuels are bad, but what if you put a shiny green coat of paint on it and call it biogas? Then it'll pass muster. And that's exactly what they're doing with this factory farm biogas. Now, if in case folks don't know, biogas is when they put the manure from a livestock operation either in a lagoon and catch the air coming off of it, or in a digester tank. And basically they have bacteria digest some of the manure matter and generate more methane, which can then be sold as a fuel. So again, they're still leaving a lot of manure there, but they're drawing the burnable gas off of it. And because it's, technically renewable, like it comes out of an animal that will continue to poop, they can call it renewable energy. And politicians of both parties are really buying this whole idea hook, line, and sinker. In every state, you're going to see biogas pushed as a renewable energy source. A lot of the times it comes in the form of a state's renewable portfolio standard, basically the state government standard for where its energy needs to come from, including renewable sources. So biogas will be right up there along solar or wind. And it should be noted that much like other schemes, if anyone remembers clean coal, biogas is just one more false solution that continues to pollute while allowing giant corporations to take a profit off of that pollution. We're also seeing state governments incentivize biogas through tax credit schemes, and of course, putting a lot of money to support research at public universities, money that could be going to education, to design the technologies that the corporations later benefit from. So, we just want to put this on folks' radar because this is a little bit newer than a lot of the fossil fuel stuff. And Unfortunately, although there are ongoing efforts in North Carolina and Delaware and a few other states to fight biogas, there really aren't as many coordinated state and local campaigns as we'd like to see. But if you're involved in environmental work locally, particularly renewable energy work, you should really be keeping a lookout for these biogas schemes and make sure to take a stand against them. Now, the second thing I want to talk about are federal solutions to the factory farm problem itself. Over the past few years, the movement against factory farms and for a better food and farm system has really picked up steam. In the 2019-2020 session of Congress, we saw two great bills introduced that we think embody a vision for a better food and farm system. The first of those is the Farm System Reform Act, introduced by Cory Booker in the Senate and Ro Khanna in the House. This bill is a souped up version of these state level moratorium bills. First off, the FSRA puts a moratorium on all new factory farms, all new, which I think is defined as more than 1,000 animal units. But it also goes beyond that. It sets a date to phase out factory farming completely in the United States. And it doesn't just ban factory farms in the long run, it also sets aside a pot of money to help farmers who are currently trapped in this contract grower system transition to more responsible forms of agriculture. It's not just about stopping these destructive forms of animal agriculture, but it's about building something better in its place and giving resources to the people who want to do it. The Farm System Reform Act was reintroduced last month, and Food and Water Watch is one of the groups leading the charge to get as many representatives and senators on this bill as possible. Now, the second piece of legislation I want to talk about is the merger moratorium bill. This bill has been introduced before, a new version's coming out this year, but basically I talked a whole bunch about consolidation, these companies merging or buying each other out and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. This bill acknowledges that that's actually bad, and maybe we should keep an eye on that as a federal government. So it will put a moratorium on these kind of buyouts and mergers, and will also investigate the impact that these mergers that have already happened have had on our economy, on workers, on consumers, farmers, and other groups. So, you know, a moratorium and a study, it's a start. Last, in terms of a call to action, I want to say that the state level effort to fight factory farms all across the country is crucial, and it's a gateway to this broad federal vision. I'm going to be working with WILPF's Earth and Democracy Committee to compile a list of states where these campaigns are ongoing. And, you know, if you're interested, you can plug in. They're happening all over the place, but I want to give a special shout out to campaigns in Iowa and North Carolina, in Oregon against mega dairies, in New Mexico, in Delaware, and in Maryland, where folks are fighting the factory farm industry as we speak. Now, another way you can help is to help with these federal bills. I'm actually going to drop a link in the chat right now where you can contact your legislators about the Farm System Reform Act, but it's also the merger moratorium bill, since I see a request in the chat. And then there's a whole host of state legislation depending on where you are. So if you want to support this effort, this is one way to do it. Lastly, if you live in the agricultural community, follow Sharon's advice, be active locally. Laws vary state by state, but folks in Iowa have fought factory farms by running for local office, by passing county resolutions, and just by turning out to zoning meetings to stop new factory farms. These fights are often hard, but a group of dedicated people can make a difference. So I know we only have maybe about 8 minutes for questions, but you know, that's the call to action. Emily, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, thanks. Now that we've given you a lot to think about, we're offering a brief time for questions to any of the presenters. You can put your question in the chat, and there are a couple of there that I'll get to. You can raise your hand in the icon in the lower part of the screen. I'll put my address in the chat, and if you'd like to email questions or comments, I will be sure to follow up with you. And just remember that the Earth Democracy Committee is planning to do some ongoing study and advocacy for this, so please be sure to follow them as well. And there was a question here, don't we need to look at the high demand of meat around the world by all of us reducing our diet of animal products in the book Drawdown, edited by Paul Hawkins. Scientists have rated eating more plant-based diet as the number 4 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and hopefully CAFOs. Sure. Does anybody, John, you want to address that? Or yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, individual choices are one way to solve this problem, but you can't change the entire society by individual purchasing choices. This demand for meat hasn't always been the case. It was itself a part of, it was a policy decision. We've seen the promotional campaigns for pork, the other white meat. We've seen so many, like, these campaigns are funded. We can change demand, but we have to stop. We have to hit it at the policy level. Folks going vegan, going vegetarian is good, but it might not be enough to crack this nut.
Thank you for that, John. Someone, I can't find this question, was asking about how the moratorium operates somewhat, how they know how many pigs someone has on a farm, and I'm not sure how to answer that. John, if you know that, or Donna can comment. I mean, I think it's probably not well recorded or anybody caring about that, actually. Some moratorium in name only, sort of. Well, Donna, do you have some comments on that, since it's North Carolina's moratorium we're talking about, I guess?
Yes. In terms of the moratorium, I've been trying to do as much research as possible. I also have a fellow with Friends of the Earth now doing some research in these areas, and it is hard to find the data. The actual experience of people on the ground of seeing the growth of farms in their area does not coincide with the statements made by regulators that since 2014, there's been no new farms, no new hog farms. So it's a matter right now of a numbers game in terms of trying to track through what's happening. So you're right, Emily. It's written in such a way that if you're not a lawyer in this area, you won't really know what the primary ways are to track that. I think what's happening in Duplin and Sampson counties with the digester, for instance, of Smithfield and Dominion is a good example of that. There's 19 farms that are going to be part of this digester system, and yet we could only find the name of 4 because those are corporate owned. They would not even release the name of the other farms because they're not owned by the corporation, and our regulators accepted that as it's okay. So when you have that kind of behavior going on, we don't have much confidence in the fact that moratorium is really doing much as it's supposed to do. And I'll stop there.
Sad thing for sure. Mary Beth has an interesting question here. Are there any, since farmers are only hearing one story from the corporate controlled sources, universities, and of course the corporations, there used to be farmer operated grange organizations, other things for farmers to share information. Is there any effort for forming this kind of counter into the effort to farmers and farmland owners? Does grange still exist?
Well, part of our work in Robinson County is just that. There are a number of small farmers. Now, when I grew up, a small farm was considered 50 acres. If you had anything over that, it was pretty good size. I'm showing my age there. But by today's standards of small farmers of a few hundred acres, we are working to organize those farmers to have their own voice. This is a major part. When you see the signs all over North Carolina that says support farmers, those are usually in line with support the corporate farmer, not the family farmer. So we're trying to get the family back in the farm through direct organizing with the farmers. I'm not sure if the grange is still around. We haven't connected to that, but we are doing geographic organizing in counties in the state.
And I would just add, Jan?
I just wanted to add that several of us are active in the Iowa Farmers Union. We have a very active farmers union here. They're a member of our coalition. So that means they support a moratorium. And they have lunch and learns every week. They're a half an hour, and they have a big attendance, and the farmer can go back and get back to business after just a half an hour. One of Sharon's co-people on her board was presented at one of them. They're very active. They go to Washington, they go to the Hill. I don't know about the Grange, but I can tell you the Iowa Farmers Union here in Iowa is very active.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say. Like a lot of farmers get their news on this stuff from either the companies they buy from or from the Farm Bureau, who they buy insurance through. But Farmers Union chapters in every state, as well as the National Farmers Union, are a great source for farmers on how to shift to more responsible practices on this front.
Great. And there's just 2 minutes left. The question about biogas from Barbara. What about water table pollution from seepage from the lagoons into the water tables and aquifers? And in a state like California, where we have fracking in many areas where there is factory agriculture, if not on top of one another, but close enough to be of concern. So yeah, John, the biogas, well, the water table pollution from seepage from lagoons, really big problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have so many lagoons in the state as much as the digester tanks, but I would agree that like anytime you're collecting that much animal manure, there's going to be some water problems. A big problem with our contamination is actually just spreading it on the fields and the runoff. I think a big problem, honestly, is that, in a lot of states, including Iowa, a lot of the regulatory authority of the EPA has been delegated to the state level Department of Natural Resources or what have you. And so they sort of pass the buck back and forth between each other, especially in these more right-leaning states. They're not going to do anything, even when you have, a Democrat in the presidency and have an administration with an EPA that's a little bit stronger. They're just going to say, oh, we've already delegated authority to the state. So it's hard, but we see the problem. The problem is there. What levers do we got to pull is sort of the question.
Donna? I feel the need to add this in Naima's absence. There has been strong documentation of pollution of the water table in the counties that she was speaking about, Duplin and Sampson. In fact, the matter, they get this one church has had regular notices pinned on its door for the last decade saying you're out of compliance with clean water and you can no longer use it in your church. And so they're bringing in hauling water. So there's a lot of cases documented where there's many homes in close proximity to the lagoons. We also have the spray problems that John was mentioning, where it's obvious that the water is being affected, but there are these on-the-run examples of how much the water table is impacted in these counties that have the largest digester facilities.
Darian, may we continue for a minute?
Yes, go ahead for another 5 minutes.
Okay, excellent, thank you. There's
5 more minutes.
question about the feed.
We can't hear you, Emily, for some reason.
You're really quiet. I think you just need to be closer to the mic.
Okay. There's a question from Mary Beth about the economic war on small pork producers. The price of feeds for pigs is rising unrealistically. And of course, small pig farmers who can't buy in huge bulk amounts are being put between a rock and a hard place, really to discourage those independent farmers, I guess. Donna, you've had some comments about that and understood what it's like from some of the small farmers. Donna, you want to say anything about that? Or
I'm sorry, I had a glitch and I didn't catch all of the question. Who was it that did the question? I'll look at it.
It's Mary Beth Gardam. The question about how small farmers are being really in a pinch when they can't buy in bulk and their price of raising animals is huge.
And this is one of the things that often forces some of the smaller farmers into contracts with Smithfield, Tyson, or any of the other corporate farmers, because they are at a disadvantage. And there's a number of efforts to use the farmers associations to try to figure out ways where they might become, a group themselves to be able to develop ways that they can get their supplies and their foods, et cetera. This right here, I think, is one of the questions that I hear all the time from the smaller farmers who are trying to fight Smithfield in particular. And You don't hear it so much from the poultry farmers yet. Poultry farms, by the way, in North Carolina have zero regulation. You do not have to have any permits to get poultry houses. And when you're talking about some of these poultry houses that may produce 1 million chickens a year, that's a pretty large impact. So, this negativity towards the small farmers of not being able to access their supplies is directly related, I believe, to the control that the corporate farmers are putting into the industry. John, do you have any more to add to that?
No, I think you said it right. You know, this is a product of the consolidation of both our meat processing as well as like our commodity grains. Mm-hmm. The bigger these companies are, the more that they can control the prices that, you know, independent farmers have to put up with. And it's that power imbalance between the big companies that are inevitably in every part of our supply chain and these farmers. I mean, I hear a lot from pig farmers about like the lack of packing houses or of storage lockers because, you know, most of them are controlled by the big companies. They either have a fee or they don't let people outside their integration chain store there. So we gotta pick this monopoly sort of system apart.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that Mary Beth would hear about working on the farm bill for some subsidies for support of small farmers. I think that is a way that we can try to leverage the regulators and the decision makers at that level. Because as you all can imagine, it's not an easy job to attack the Smithfields and the Dominions of the world. But we should be able to hold our decision makers at the federal and state level. Because I don't think it's just farm bills at the federal level, but it's also at the state level. And another place that this, I think, just we're running out of time, I know, but we need to really hold EPA's feet to the fire for some of these regulatory issues, especially around the designation of these energies in my mind, but of these facilities as renewable. The definitions they use are challenging to say the least. So I'll stop there so we'll have more time.
I wanted to throw in real quick, Emily, if I could. I wanted to mention to Mary Beth's question that the Farm Systems Reform Act does include money for farmers to voluntarily move out of CAFO system farming into family farming type farming. And then I also wanted to respond to Paula, who talks to her cousin. It reminds me of when I go to the Iowa Farmers Union convention, there's a young farmer there who's still doing it the way we don't want him to do it. So when we sit down and talk, we talk about, you know, you've got some land, you know, why don't you try some other things? People are moving, you know, we had 63% of Iowans support a moratorium. So why not get ahead of the game and have some, go back to some restorative or regenerative farming methods. And maybe your cousin could have a separate, you know, start a separate market for range-free chickens and gradually get him over to that kind of a system.
And Jan, I think, do you have any comments about, we're going to work through Earth Democracy, I hope to have WILPF US advocate for the bill that is in process.
Yeah, Liv was going to talk about that, I think, right? If you want to unmute Liv. And
Earth Democracy's role in helping us advocate for the passage of the bill to reform factory farming.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just saying that it's my understanding that all of your words, the recording, as well as the links to the video will be on the Earth Democracy website. So for all of you, we have the opportunity to share and to learn from each other. And Earth Democracy is very appreciative of the opportunity to work together to make these improvements. And we're not even, we can just say speaking truth to power, because that's exactly what we are doing every day when we speak, as you spoke today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who has participated today. John, shall we